Well, good morning, folks. It's 10:07. I'd like to welcome everyone to the September 2023 meeting of the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee. I'll bring the meeting to order now. And I'd like to start that meeting by acknowledging that we are meeting on the ancestral lands of the Pakwichan, Sakim, Sawat, Sartlip, and Malahat peoples who have lived here from time immemorial. Although they're not with us present at the table today, I would hope that their traditions and wisdom would help guide us in our discussions today as we work together to help continue to move towards an incredibly inclusive community here on the Saanich Peninsula. Next, just to help everyone out, refresh names, and that we'll do a quick round if we could. Just if you could, your name and who you represent or your position. That'll help all of us remember everyone's names because we don't have name tags, but also help Vanessa here and anyone else that has vision problems re-identify the voices. And also when you do speak, if you could, if I don't identify you as the chair, if you could please say your name, just who you are before you start to speak during the meeting, that would be very helpful. Thank you. So my name is David Willows. I'm the chair of the Saanich Peninsula Accessibility Advisory Committee, and I'm a community representative from the district of Central Saanich. And I'll pass to my right here, Vanessa.
I'm Vanessa Pettinger. I'm a community representative from Sidney, and I'm completely blind.
My name is Lee York. I'm the community representative from the town of Sidney.
My name is Charlene Froom, and I'm vice chair and representative from North Saanich. My name is Jennifer Bennett.
David Ryder and
Terry Keith, councillor from the town of Sidney.
Marty Brewster, senior manager at Recreation.
Go online, Councillor Newton.
Good morning, Gord Newton from the traditional territory of the Cowichan tribes this morning, councillor with the district of Central Saanich.
Gord and Councillor DiBattista.
Morning, everybody. Phil DiBattista, councillor, district of North Saanich. Sorry, I was called into work, so I'm sitting here roadside so I can take part.
Thanks for keeping us all safe in Central Saanich there, Phil. And just again, for voice recognition in that, I'd like to go through the staff as well. We'll start with Sandy.
Director of Corporate Services and Corporate Officer for the District of Central Saanich.
Trevor Parks, I'm the Senior Planner for the District of North Saanich.
Richard Roy, I'm the municipal planner for the city.
Roy Newcomb, I'm the Director of Municipal Planning for the town of Sidney.
And joining today, I'm Haley Hino McConnell. I'm a representative of Left Turn, Right Turn, an accessibility consulting firm that was hired to support the municipalities with their accessibility plans.
Right on. Thank you very much, folks. There's no one else behind the pillar there, right? Nope. Okay, good. And just for those online, how was the audio on that?
It was great. Reasonable enough for me.
Yep.
Okay. Right on. So next, approval of the agenda. Any last minute additions? If not, can I get a motion to approve the agenda, please? Mr. Lee. Yeah, it's a motion to approve. Second. Oh, Mr. Ryder there. So motion seconded. All in favor of approval? Any opposed? Seeing none opposed, motion carried. Next item is approval of the minutes. Any changes or amendments to the minutes? If not, a motion to approve the minutes as presented, please.
So moved.
Moved Councillor O'Keefe, seconded Charlene Froom. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, carried unanimously. Thank you. Next, item 5 is the accessibility plan, current state assessment and recommendations. And I believe that's your spot there, Kaylee.
Good morning.
Sandy or Anna, I don't know if you're able to load the slide deck that was shared last week.
And so just for those online, if you're having trouble hearing, if you could let us know, because I think this is a really important part of the meeting today for the community. Yeah. Yeah, use your captain's voice.
I can certainly try. And I'm fine with those slides for the first. Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I think most importantly, I should reintroduce myself and why I'm here. So it's nice to see everybody that was able to attend the July meeting. Myself and my colleague Kayla Hunt, we're here to talk about the work that our organization is doing to support the municipalities with their forthcoming accessibility plans. At that meeting, we received guidance from staff public engagement. So what kind of methods of engagement would be most suitable for the residents of the 3 municipalities, both with and without disabilities. So we appreciate your feedback there. We had really fruitful engagement across the 3 municipalities. So thank you for welcoming us into your communities and giving us the opportunity to have those conversations. Another thing that happened at the July meeting was a recommendation from SPAAC for us to forward our survey to residents to comment on accessibility, and the uptake increased significantly after that exchange. So we appreciate you connecting with us with other stakeholders, community members, and service organizations. We got a lot of really useful, constructive for purposes of accessibility planning. And furthermore, during the conversation, we talked about what were the priorities of staff members. So we had a chance to hear some feedback from you on a survey that was sent out earlier in the summer, and then we carried that dialogue during the July meeting. So all of that dialogue, conversation, public engagement, survey engagement was used to inform the recommendations that we made to the 3 municipalities in terms of what should appear in their accessibility plans. And so you should have received sometime late last week a slide presentation that is effectively the skeleton version of the accessibility plans that the municipalities are going to be putting forth to council later in October. But of course, we want your feedback on the recommendations that we have made to improve accessibility and to see if we and the municipalities are going in the right direction as far as future visions go. Just to clarify, what you received was kind of a collective effort among the 3 municipalities. So there may be differences in each individual municipality chooses to adopt from those recommendations, but it will carry forward from what you see in the document that we shared. So with that said, I think, yep, great. So we're just waiting for the slide presentation, but I can even, from memory, chat about some of the elements. So just to remind you of the methodology for this project, in other words, how did we come to the recommendations that we ultimately made? It began with conversations with staff from the 3 municipalities to give us an idea of the internal workings of the actual government systems and the work that's being done. From there, we made a request for key documents like official community plans, active transportation plans, and internal policies that dealt with, for example, employee accommodations in municipalities, things like that. And we reviewed what the current state is. There are so to meet residents and talk about their primary accessibility concerns. And so that was what fed into the recommendations. Of course, we're also mindful of the British Columbia Act. So there are certain things that are recommended to appear in accessibility plans or areas of priority. We also heard from staff recommendations for areas of focus. For example, one would be public awareness and engagement about accessibility. That's not part of the Accessible British Columbia Act, but we felt that was, agreed with your recommendation that that was an important area to pay attention to, because you can make all the plans for accessibility you want, but if the public kind of will and understanding of what that looks like or what it means to the community is there, you're not going to get very far. So those are all the elements that went in to inform the recommendations that we made to the municipalities. And then the project team, who are represented here by Emily, Trevor, and Corey, reviewed the recommendations we made and just ensured that the language we were using was faithful to how the municipalities operate, will of the town, and so on and so forth. So what you see here today is a combination of our recommendations as accessibility professionals, your experiences as persons with disabilities, and then the municipal staff's experiences of how the towns actually work, because that is critical. So those will be the recommendations that we are presenting. I see we've got the slides up there. Is there a clicker for me or?
I'm navigating it.
Okay.
Tell me the theme and we'll get you there.
Sure. So I think you saw the others. I'm not going to do, it's not school. I'm not going to read to you from all of the slides, but if you wouldn't mind advancing to the summary of SPAAC feedback. Perfect. So this you should have been able to take a look at prior to my visit today, but I just want to reiterate the SPAAC priorities that we identified from what we heard, what we read, and what we learned. The first and foremost is having elected officials, municipal staff, and others with the ability to make changes, listen to the lived experiences with people with disabilities. So SPAAC, we know, is just a microcosm of a larger representation of residents who have a wide variety of needs. And so we appreciate your contributions here, but that you echoed to us that you're just one or a group among many, and that was important. And then working with staff and councils to find opportunities for greater input on initiatives in the municipalities. And I think as I've come to learn, the evolution of staff, which is a recently formed committee, is really starting to find its footing in terms of how you engage and items that appear on the agenda and where your feedback is being asked for and incorporated. And so my understanding is that you're hoping to advance that relationship and deepen it. And so we thought that was important to note. Also pursuing civic education on the importance of accessibilities and what accessible municipalities can be and should look like. So again, this is really important because we believe as professionals and you believe as people with disabilities that accessibility is relevant to everybody. It's not a niche issue or topic, and it's something that should be seeded throughout all facets of municipal life and community participation. And so that public education component is really important because when it comes to priorities in the community, where resourcing and budgets go, people can misperceive accessibility as a niche group that affects a small group, or a niche topic that affects a small group of people. And that's simply not the case. Greater public awareness about the benefits of accessibility is recommended. Prioritizing accessibility in projects at the planning stages. So this is something that when we spoke to municipal staff, they were really eager to get into and think about and find effective ways to incorporate that, not just as kind of a line item for accessibility, but what that might look like from each stage of a project. So from resourcing vendors that you might work with in procurement or working with experts who are going to be working on the project. So that was a great recommendation from SPAAC and something the municipalities are enthusiastic about. It's very simple, but it's important, having the ability to participate fully in all aspects of community life. So one thing that we heard from a lot of residents that we spoke to was, I can get around well enough, do most of what I need to do. But that's, the floor, it's not the ceiling, and it's not where I know you want to be as municipalities. So most residents felt like there were improvements, things were moving in the right direction, but they were still able to identify things that they couldn't do independently, comfortably, or at a reasonable level as other residents. And so being able to have that full participation was really important. And then finally, accessible, safe transportation, including accessible parking, especially with side loading vans. There seems to be a dearth of that. Improved handy dart services or alternatives, since we heard that handy dart service was sometimes unreliable, required a long lead time. So we're aware of that. And potentially intermunicipal transit to access a wider array of services. Depending on which town you live in, you may have more or less access to, things like professionals, doctors, and whatnot, and may need to use the facilities in other towns. So before I proceed with the recommendations, are there any priorities that you feel we didn't recognize or capture as we've stated them here? Things that you would like us and the municipalities to direct their attention to when formalizing the accessibility plan? Sure.
It looks like you've done a pretty good job of capturing certainly the key themes and that. Thank you.
Fabulous. Okay, great. So we'll proceed. I think, Emily, we can go straight to the recommendations. Yeah, I think we probably have a lot to dig into here, so we'll save time there.
Now I will say I'm happy to spend as much time with you as allows. I do have a hard stop at 12 because I'm leaving for the airport right after this. So how we want to, are there other agenda items that need to be attended to? So how much time should we plan to focus on?
I mean, I guess we need to get this done and the rest we can bring back forward if we have to, but yeah.
Great. So, I mean, there are 32 recommendations. I don't think it's necessarily effective to go through each recommendation one by one, but having shared the recommendations with you ahead of time, there may be some that jumped out at you that you'd like, strengthened or reworded, or things you feel we didn't capture. So I think it might be helpful to talk about the recommendations by area, and what, again, sort of your priorities are, or where you saw opportunities for tweaking or improvement. So the first is within the bucket of employment, and I want to clarify that employment means employment with the municipality. So it's not the small businesses in your community; those things are out of the purview of the municipalities, but for staff who work for with the municipalities. This is what we're talking about. And I'll just remind you of the areas that we chatted about rather than reading them all out, and then we can begin a dialogue. So accommodations policies for staff who work in the municipalities, training and awareness among staff who are, going to be involved in accessibility initiatives and across the board, recruitment and hiring, so greater representation of people with disabilities in municipal staff through effective recruitment and hiring practices that will actually allow people to find the jobs, apply, participate in interviews in an inclusive way, and so forth. Knowledge building as well. And so that would be kind of knowledge and capacity building internally with staff to ensure that the expertise that is needed for their particular area of work, that they have a sense of how accessibility ties into that and best practices related to that. Consulting. So, I mean, this is, part of what we're doing here today. So ensuring that employees with disabilities are a part of the conversation about how to improve accessibility within employment. Mental health was another big area. Of course, invisible disabilities are harder to accommodate and determine what that might look like. It's individualized. And so discussions around how that can be best supported, how that can be captured, potentially in an accommodation policy, for example, was an important area of focus. So I'll leave that there and just ask if there are any particular items that you want to draw our attention to.
Councillor Keefe?
Those are all really. The one thing that I was thinking of is, and maybe it's. I was thinking about, it's good to, in terms of the postings, to use and language, inclusive language, bring up the issue that the municipality is willing to accommodate a person. That's it. The only other thing I might add, it's not included elsewhere, is something about making the extra effort to help organizations that provide services to persons with disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So another organization, trying to diversify ways, knowing who those organizations are, the CNIB, the League Club, the Victoria,
Victoria Disability Resource Center?
So and including that.
Okay, now you're making this too easy. I'm a little scared here.
Oh, sorry.
Far away for you.
If for those of you guys that are online, if I miss you, please say something. It's that the hand is about this big.
Sure.
Mile away.
Then I'll chime in and wave my hand and say that I had a question before we got too far into the additional recommendations. It's Gord with the Central Saanich, and just to the presenter, if I could, through the chair, just regarding the engagement process that you found to come up with these recommendations. The feedback that you received, is that sort of typical with respect to respondents for communities of this size? I was just hoping you could speak to that briefly.
Sure. Yeah, in fact, we found that it was representative of the type of engagement that we expect. There are those who want to be engaged will engage, and those who are, on the side of apathy, unfortunately, are difficult to capture. But we were happy with the depth of engagement, the feedback we got, what lacked in quantity made up for in quality. So people were really specific and directive in their feedback about where their priorities were. So we were pleased with the outcomes, certainly.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor O'Keefe?
Actually, well, since Warren brought that up, I did hear some feedback from the visually disabled community, that it was hard for them. So the White Cane Club that we did contact, and they had trouble navigating the survey. It wasn't clear to them, like, was there somebody else to contact? And probably if I had provided some information to them, and I guess by the time it got circulated to all of them, I guess they didn't really have enough to get back to me to say, maybe we tried this, but it doesn't work, because it was kind of a short time frame. I think.
Did they mention specifically the areas that were inaccessible? Because we'd like to address that. We did some user testing with blind and low vision survey users prior to disseminating it, but.
Did you have anything? I'm going to a meeting with them next week.
October 12th.
Yeah, but do you recall anything?
I don't know any specifics that they had said. They just said how they had tried to do it, and it was frustrating for them and some people. Also, this presentation that was sent to me, I wasn't able to open it at all either. To me, it said it was 5 pages, but it was actually like 38 because the slides image. So I don't really know what to. I don't really know about this.
I think with this, the way that it came out as part of the agenda as one big PDF file, that the PowerPoints may have been transformed from text and whatnot to just images. So I think that's something that we might have to work on within the municipality here on how we can disseminate the information for the committee. But yeah, Vanessa's been doing a fantastic job of showing me how her tools that she's got work or don't work with different things like emails and PDF files and whatnot. Yeah,
so the PowerPoint slideshow is formatted for accessibility with all text with properly labeled headings, checking reading order and whatnot. So if it was delivered as a PowerPoint file, should have been good to go accessibility wise. We ran it through the accessibility checker and again did user testing on it, but it could be the method of transfer that had barriers. So, but I'll make a note of both of those things.
I'm happy to show you how it works on my phone after and everything. Like,
sure.
It's perfect. I put the screen curtain on so it's black to other people, and then it reads. So you guys kind of get how I get it.
So just to clarify, so if it was sent as a PowerPoint, would you have been able to read the text then?
I don't know, because usually when I get stuff sent to me as PDF, it reads to me. But this one didn't. It just said image.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, Lorraine.
Just whenever you're finished.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I think this was just a format thing, so we'll work on that. Okay. Yeah, Lorraine.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the employment piece, it's just I'm quite. It's great to see this. The training and awareness. I'd be very interested in. I think there's some ability to collaborate amongst the 3 municipalities on this piece, as well as Panorama, because of, we're constantly wanting to provide that customer service for all our programs and services. So I'd be very interested, because when we say deliver training, what does that look like? Who's going to deliver it? But I think there's a real synergy that we could maybe work on, an individual or a consultant or someone that we could set that up with the training and awareness, which I think would be great. On the piece around recruitment and hiring, I'm also interested in that because I think in our sector, there's lots of opportunities for employment, you know, on the job requirements. So again, I'd like to see, you know, conduct a review of recruitment, hiring and onboarding processes to kind of delve into that to see with the 3 municipalities and with Panorama, how we can, you know, see on that.
Member Froom?
As far as the training goes, I think that's a really important part with the people who are doing the hiring and interviewing process. I applied for a job once, and I'm going back several years ago, and they totally disregarded me because I wasn't able to get on the floor and do CPR. So training staff, that there's got to be, again, I think the accommodation that, oh, if you want to hire me, you're going to have to jump for hoops to make it work for me, because I want to be a person who contributes to whatever job I'm doing. But I think by opening up the training to staff, that as far as there's people with cerebral palsy whose intelligence exceeds many people, because verbally it comes across, it's not, to get over. So I think it's the training on that hiring was is a huge thing, just to open up eyes to things that you didn't know. You don't know what you don't know, so the training.
I think part of that is also not just understand, you know, the individuals and what's the proprietary affairs, but understanding the different technology and ways of, there is ways of doing it different. In my previous life, we went through this process. You know, there was things that we initially made assumptions of, you know, a person who was in a wheelchair just couldn't do this job. Or if they had this, it wouldn't work. Once we understand it, technology here, the door to a lot.
Mr. Reddy? Yeah, go ahead.
More broadly.
That is an area where we have police representation typically. So we actually have some respondents and their family members participate in this, which was great. I mean, it's not a huge amount, but 3 or 4 families who were affected by cognitive disabilities. And so we were pleased to have that input, but it is an area where engagement is lesser. And I think that is probably both as a consulting firm, but as a municipalities to think about, you know, in later recommendations, I think that's more captured, but that integration into all facets of community life, including public awareness and engagement. So how do we reach those things as well? But yeah, admittedly, the representation of those groups is always low.
That I find that's typical. Excludes a reasonable population. And why it's a so it is something. So it's a kind of.
I appreciate that feedback. I mean, it is about continuous improvement, right? I mean, all of us would do risk. We've patted ourselves on the back and said, and accessibility achieved. I mean, it's not, we wish that there was a magic wand for that, but we know that there isn't. And it's so much deeper. It involves that kind of relationship building as well with communities who are around. And I think on the employment commentary, thank you everybody for sharing your feedback. When we think of the training and awareness, I think it also goes to not just assumptions about what a person can or can't do, but assumptions about bona fide job requirements. So a lot of job applications have, you know, you've seen them, how far up the page you have to scroll to get to the bottom of the application, because there are these nonsense skills that don't apply with the functions of the job whatsoever. And so I think that's another element where we were careful to say, you know, review recruitment and hiring practices, because it could include things like, what does a job posting look like? What does an interview process look like? And you know, to your point about an individual with CP, one of my very close friends in the accessibility biz who has CP and is a wheelchair user, has limited mobility of his arms. And when he went to an interview for a big corporate job with a big company, they were sensitive to the fact that he's probably not going to be able to shake our hand. And that's such a, kind of business sort of culture thing that if you don't shake a hand, you're not professional, you're rude, you're dismissive. He also came with a service dog. And so when they started the interaction meeting, they just kind of gave him a polite head nod, started the conversation. They had a quiet area for the dog and a bowl of water for the dog, so that he could show up to the interview and feel like he was presenting his best self on his terms of what that meant. Of course, he got the job and so on and so forth. But I think it's, it is all part and parcel of that. It's not even just an accommodation once you get the job. It's about rethinking what professionalism looks like, employment looks like, those processes. We appreciate that too.
Vanessa, did your hand?
Yeah,
Yep.
I also think it's gotta start at a really, really early age. These kids don't know about any of these disabilities or barriers or anything like this, and if we can teach them at a young age and start there, I think we'll have better success in our lives. Like with the school district 63 equitable access team that we're a part of, I think we should be bringing this into the elementary schools. They have assemblies about all these other things, but let's have one about disabilities and things, so that as these kids grow up, they're not afraid of it, they're aware of it, these barriers are removed, and it's not even.
I think the representation on staff from Panorama, I will say it wasn't something that could make it into the accessibility plan because of the different jurisdiction, but we heard a lot of feedback from the community about age and ability integrated recreation activities. And so I think that's an excellent point, and a good opportunity for just community participation in recreation and social life, where it's not so like didactic, where it's like, this is accessibility, this is how you do it. It's just experiences with each other, and I would say the differences in how we navigate and operate in the world. So quite well taken. But certainly, Panorama, that's something in future planning. Age and ability integration we heard a lot of feedback across the three municipalities, and I'm appetite for those types of programs. So there's free feedback.
One comment for me, just sort of in support of this too. For people that want to take a look at the potential impact of it, the Conference Board of Canada did a report a number of years ago. It was titled something along the lines of the business case for building physically accessible work environments. And it was done at the Rick Hansen Foundation, and it's literally billions of dollars for the economy. So when there's a significant potential upside economic benefit to the community in general doing this sort of work as well.
In the interest of time, I think we'll probably advance to next set of recommendations, next group. So into services. So services with the municipalities, we know a lot of them are subcontracted out. So that made our ability to make recommendations around service provision in the municipalities somewhat limited, but we did our best to figure out where there were areas of improvement. And they were, fairly straightforward recommendations. One of the things that came out from our discussions with municipal staff was the idea of service desks. So that they get a lot of residents coming in and asking for support or feedback for information that either they didn't find accessibly online. This could be for all kinds of reasons. It could be due to lack of familiarity with technology. It could be due to inaccessibility. It could be due to cognitive barriers where that face-to-face support was important. And so the idea of a service desk or kiosk or other method of support to residents to navigate services, like how do I sign up to pay my tax bill? Or what do I do in this event? Or even just how does the municipality work and what are you responsible for? And how do you affect my life was something that was stated. There are the municipal staff were keen to point out that most people would be willing to do this anyway, that staff, if you came in and had a question, could support you through that, but something that's a little bit more formal and is well advertised and on a regular schedule so that people know that there's a point person that is well versed in being able to support them with their needs was one recommendation. Budgets, so including a municipal budget line item that would allow the municipalities to address ad hoc accessibility requests. So recommendations later in procurement and infrastructure would include accessibility as a line item in specific projects. But what happens if there's a need for a council meeting and somebody needs a sign language interpreter, or there's something else that's going on in the municipality where there is an expense that arises? No more excuses about we just don't have the money for that, or we never considered that. So that is something that municipalities were eager to see hopefully reflected. And then events, so develop and implement accessible events checklists or a guidance document. So again, in the early stages of event planning, when you're deciding where the venue is it physically accessible? But then beyond that, how are you going to advertise the event? What methods on social media? What kind of document accessibility is there going to be? What kind of support will there be for the event? So it could be used by local community groups, nonprofits, for-profit businesses as well. It could be like a resource that the municipality shares. So it's not just events they're putting on, but it's a resource that they can then provide to the community as a set of guidance to say, you know, this is what we'd like to see at events as far as setting a good threshold and standard for accessibility. I wish that I could, you know, add a recommendation that says like residents with disabilities don't pay property tax or something. I couldn't do that. Nobody let me include that. So, you know, admittedly, these recommendations are kind of lesser than others, but if you have ideas about things that are under municipal provision of services that you'd like to see. The other one that I would have loved to be able to see, but I think it is still contracted out, is like somebody comes into your house and does your garbage and recycling for you and takes it out. They didn't get that one to fly either. So, but any thoughts on the recommendations that exist or anything that we might be missing?
Charlene?
I like the line item. I think that's an important part of it if you don't feel that it's an issue. The events planning checklist, I think is really important because there have been municipal events that have popped up for whether it's community engagement or whatever that I go to. Oops, I can't access it because I didn't think to set it up. Should have been an accessible location. So I think as we learn more and more that hey, we've just got this checklist that'll eventually and happen to anybody that comes into the municipality. Say, we're thinking about throwing this event. We really want the town support. And hey, that's a great idea. Here's our checklist. You might want it. And eventually, hopefully we won't need this stuff, but it's been something that's lacked over the last few years as far as community engagement. There's been several times I've shown other places in the community. So frustrated with it. So I think that's huge.
And the great thing about something like that is it's not actually more work. You have to pick a venue anyway, pick an accessible one, right? But it's the reminder in advance so that you're prepared to say, okay, at this step, what do I need to think of now at this step? So
there's a lot of instances that you want to support different community businesses or places. And I get that you want to support your community. But maybe part of them is like, you know, we really like to hold our event there, but if you're not accessible, and I want to encourage that if they come like accessible.
Terry?
Yeah, no, I really like the events, checklist. The Richmond has and I also think it's another example of where the three municipalities do their own thing. You know, look at what the city of Richmond has done and others, and you know, there's just quite a depth, but you know, prune it down or make it relevant. So good idea. The thing that I was wondering about is, like Charlene says, like events are a big part of life, you know, especially in Sydney. There's all kinds of concerts, the day celebrations after. A lot of those things are not necessarily organized by some of them are. And so I'm wondering with the other municipal governments that we've dealt with, have you seen cases where they make it a condition of the permit for their event, or there's a lot of community groups, arts and culture groups that we provide significant funding for. So are there policies where we can say, we give you this funding on the condition that this isn't, or we give you this permit? You know, can we have policies or bylaws? That's
Sure. I mean, I can answer what has been done. I can't promise that big promises on behalf of municipalities, but we have had other municipalities that we've worked with where, yes, to grant permits, there's a condition of an accessibility threshold and in procurement contracts as well. So in vendor agreements, they have to meet certain thresholds as defined by those individual municipalities or organizations that we work with. Now, some we work with a lot of private companies where they kind of laugh because their procurement agreement is like getting computers, or office chairs. And we say, well, those can be more or less accessible, like different software, or different things in the technology or from an ergonomic perspective. So there really is opportunity. It can start with procurement. Who are we sourcing, what are we sourcing, how, and whose needs does it serve? So again, I don't want to make promises on behalf of the municipalities how far that can go, but there is actually an item related to procurement where that is going to be a consideration. So it has happened.
Chair, if I may.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Gordon and Jennifer.
Sorry, I didn't. Some of the mics are cutting in and out at the table, so please forgive me if this has been brought up before. But just regarding the events, and I heard a little bit of the conversation, and I'm just wondering if, and I too like that idea, if that could be included once that guideline or checklist is put and established for the Peninsula municipalities. That's even incorporated into the application component. So that it's front and center as they're going through when whatever organization comes forward, that they're advised of, sort of best practices as part of it. So I support that. I think that's a great idea to look at that.
Thank you, Gordon. Jennifer.
And the bargaining is like, volunteer, we've got a large group of volunteers that do multiple things in the community, so always looking at some of the different operational senior services.
Yeah, also just one comment for me, and thinking about events in a broader perspective. One of the things that one of our constituent local governments has brought up is public works. And when there's work being done on a sidewalk or construction next to a public space, and that could be another sort of checklist and awareness piece for the municipalities and their contractors, making sure that there's that safe way to get off of the sidewalk down onto the road and then back up with a mobility device, that when there's barriers put up, that they're done so that they can be either cane detectable, all these little bits and pieces that, unless this is part of the world that you live in, you're just not aware of. But it is something that has been brought up by Central Saanich as something to look at as well.
Great. Good to know. Yeah, thank you. Capture that in notes. Yeah, Emily, did you have another? Oh, sorry, I thought your hand was on the. Fabulous. Okay, thank you. So yeah, we'll proceed to next slide. This is in the vein of emergency services, and it's certainly an important one. Where we found kind of the most opportunity for improvement in accessibility was around notification. So reviewing emergency notification systems, there's heavy reliance on social media, or like phone alerts. There are a number of barriers there, partly because, you have to, if they're not screen reader compatible, or the language. I don't know if any of you have received like at 3 a.m, one of those emergency notification things, it wakes you up from the dead of the night. And there's like a transcript this long of what's going on and what the emergency is. And so we've talked to some emergency service providers as well about the idea of there maybe being like a summary, kind of a highlight, like what is the issue about, and then the description of the details so that people know how to pay attention to notification. So, are they communicated in plain language? Is information disseminated in a variety of formats? So not over reliance on one thing that many people may use, but depending on age and ability, others may not. So we're looking to make improvements there. And then public education, so implementing a public education campaign around accessibility and emergency response. And something that we were heartened to hear from emergency services staff was that this was a big area of concern for them, that it was a barrier to them doing their jobs effectively. And so it was a two-way street, that they felt that they responded to calls where somebody was deaf or hard of hearing and they didn't know that emergency service personnel had, were there to answer the door, and so on and so forth. And so they were trying to kind of strategize ways that A, they could be more effective in their service delivery to ensure that that didn't happen. But B, also have some maybe community education campaigns around people who might have different needs in an emergency response system. What are their roles and responsibilities in advocacy or making sure that that their needs are met? So it is, because it is, a private home. So how you let people in, who you let in is of course your business. So it kind of is that back and forth relationship. But those were two areas that they felt, especially in situations where you were experiencing on the island the heat dome. What was that, a couple of summers ago? There were a lot of people who were, could benefit from wellness checks if they were in lower income housing that maybe didn't have effective cooling systems, or they just didn't know that there were cooling shelters to go to. There's a lot of door knocking going on by emergency services personnel to say, hey, here are some options. Are you doing well? Is there anything that you need? And that was one where they really recalled some barriers in terms of reaching populations. So something for them to think about.
Just on that one, and it's something that maybe spent some time talking about earlier this year, but I don't think it's covered here in terms of so the notification is good public education, but what we found in our are to have emergency plans. So when we're evacuating people or setting up centers, the requirement to think about how are you going to get people evacuated that have different disabilities. And I think there's a fair amount of reliance on the fact that in Sidney, at least, there's say seniors that are concentrated in one particular area. So they've got plans in place on how to do that, but more people are wanting to age in place. Blind people, deaf people living out on their own. So how do we reach those people to evacuate, to let them know that there's a cooling center available or whatever sort of emergency there can be. And then once they get there, what are the accommodations that are going to be required? People who are on dialysis need certain equipment facilities. So I think that's a good thing to break in terms of recommendation. So I think it's something that we're already doing. But we're absolutely.
Vanessa.
Do we have anything for the people that live on the peninsula, like a roster of how many people we actually have with disabilities on the peninsula, to know percentage or anything like that? Because I was wondering if we say had in Victoria, they have the Disability Resource Center. Why not having a Peninsula Disability Resource Center with a roster, say, of people that have disabilities, and the best way to communicate with them? Well, I'm better off to get a phone call than to get a letter in the mail. And so we know how to communicate with them. They register this way and we can communicate with them, and we also know how many and who's out there.
That's something that we talked about with emergency services personnel. And so thanks, Vanessa. It was something that some residents were interested in because they felt that it was in the interest and benefit of their safety. It's not something that we could advance in the accessibility plan only because it is a privacy issue. So it's kind of counting up and rounding all the disabled people. Some people don't want to disclose their disabilities for different reasons. So I think that there could be certain voluntary programs, like I think of like back in, in the 80s and 90s when I was a kid, like block parent, like there can be these sort of advocacy things like check on your neighbor, you post it, maybe there's like an identification tag in your window that says like all their text, I don't know what it is. I mean, I guess that would be potentially dangerous to having your number publicized. They have to think through it, but something that, is definitely more on a voluntary basis rather than appearing in the plan. Now, something that we could say is make a recommendation around liaise, emergency services to liaise with disabled residents to come up with community initiatives that support, knowledge around accessibility. I think that's something we could certainly put in, but in terms of making a recommendation for a roster, just because of privacy reasons, unfortunately, we weren't able to get something.
Yeah, because I just think that, for example, where I live, I'm in the townhouse and I have no sight and absolutely no smell. Say 2 houses down from me was on fire. I want the police to know that that person in that building is blind and has no smell. We should probably let her know that she's got to get out. It's like, I don't know if there was anything like that, like emergency services.
So we had some discussion about this, so I think the short answer is, unless there might be some information with, the latest census, I can't remember if they asked people about disabilities, but of course that's general sort of information, but it would at least give us a sense of people. But when we talked about this with one of the fire chiefs that came to me, there seemed to be the capacity to input into their dispatch system where people are. That there was a possibility, and I think maybe it's confirming that that is something available. And then, as you said before, talking about public education, letting people with disabilities know here's some options. I think at the time that we discussed this, our emergency staff felt like if there was a fire at Vanessa's house and she called to say there was a fire, the dispatcher would ask, are you able to get out on? And so they felt that that was adequate, but not really, because if the situation where there's, as Vanessa described, nobody would necessarily. So having a better idea. Something to think about.
Charlene?
I think this is a case where there's personal support. And whether like Sidney puts up their town newsletter or whatever that put up on that, if there's one bird in there, he says disabilities, just to let you know, if you're concerned about your own safety in an emergency situation, make sure that you've talked to your neighbors, make sure that you've talked to your local partner. Let them know what you're concerned. Because again, there is no way everybody is going to nail everybody with disability and know that they're there and get to their house. And so I make sure that my fire chief knows where I live. He used to cut my grass. So I make sure John knows where I am if the park was on fire. He's not getting. So I think there has to be a personal responsibility. And it's up to us to let our community know. We may need. I cut my nose off, like my face, with the survey that came out years ago, and they wanted to know if there were any invalids living in that. And I wouldn't fill out the survey because I took the objection being called an invalid. So I'll show you, I'll die in my fire. Admitting that. So again, there is a way, yes, for our community to do all this, and that's what we need to be.
And I should point out as well, under the employment bucket of recommendations, when we talk about training, some of the language in there is about like relevant staff training, so it would include emergency services personnel as well. So what that would look like for them, maybe about conversations with dispatchers or conversations with residents, again, about how do you navigate that, because I think it is, this is something where people with disabilities live in all kinds of dwellings, with all kinds of needs, with all kinds of privacy concerns. So to say there's one way that you can approach a person in their home in a very personal emergency situation is not something that would be advocated, but knowing to ask a person who's calling for help, what should I expect when I get there? Which entrance? How do I communicate my arrival with you? Then kind of ensures that that dialogue has happened. So I think that's probably, somewhere where it would land in the middle. Yeah, we have the same thing in my family. My husband is deaf, and if there was I always say, if mommy fell unconscious, to my 9-year-old, I need you to call 911. We practice, the protocol, because can my husband text 911? Yes, you can text 911 now, but guess what? I want him to go a little faster than texting. and it is one of those things where like, I think in an emergency, I would rather, you know, and my husband agrees, that he would rather sort of be robbed of his independence to do it independently and use a text service or use a relay service and actually have effective services. So we do have our own family response plan about what that looks like, and ensuring that everybody's needs are met. So I really appreciate that feedback, candid feedback. It's not cut and dry, sir. But I think, yeah, we could definitely think about something in like whether we fold it into the training section or add something about liaising with dispatchers is a really good note to make.
And also, well, just and to add in what Charlene said about preparing yourself. So there are resources available. We discussed that at the last meeting. So part of our, maybe our community education is, here's what the Disability Resource Center says you as a person with a disability. Here's the things you should be looking at.
And Vanessa, just curiosity, are you on the Peninsula alert system?
Yes, and
Okay.
the only reason I am is because there was a fire right across the street from my house and I would have had no idea, but CNIB got me to call and register.
Good.
But I don't think a lot of people know that.
No, and again, that's the communications piece. If it's not in a format that someone's going to be able to interact with and get that information, they won't know to sign up for it. So, yeah.
Fabulous. All right, rolling right along. So great timing to talk about information and communications. So we made recommendations around guidance, so including accessibility as a part of the municipal communications policies. And so this is kind of like back in the event planning. Before you even write a bulletin that's going to go out, how is it going to be disseminated? Who needs to access it? What are the features that need to be included for it to be accessible? So the municipalities differ in their like management of communications right now. So if there isn't a formal policy yet, developing one and including accessibility, or if one exists, but accessibility isn't attended to in it, adding that and expanding. So that would include best practices on social media communications, producing accessible documents, and that could be internal documents, public documents, newsletters, what have you. And that would be shared internally with employees, and things like official community plans, etc. Then websites, so conducting a digital accessibility audit of public websites and internal web systems. So we know that some of the municipalities recently have or will soon update their websites. And so this would be something that when those redevelopments are happening, figuring out where the barriers are, how to remediate them for next time and make improvements, and incorporate the feedback from these audits when making updates and improvements. And then alternatively or additionally, you can work with a digital accessibility specialist or engaging in user testing of these systems prior to launch to ensure that they meet the needs. Because sometimes even there's the web content accessibility guidelines, and that's sort of in a perfect world, everything looks like this, but that doesn't necessarily account for user experience. You can kind of tick all the boxes and it still might not be as navigable. So user testing is really important. And then training, so sourcing training on accessible communications best practices and having relevant staff complete the training. So it's one thing to have a communications policy that says, make sure you do this, but if you've never heard of alternative text and don't know what to click or where to go or how to write effective alternative text, the policy is not going to have much heft to it. So the training is important. And I think very important, and even here today, we've fallen short in some cases with meetings. So develop guidelines for meeting accessibility for both in-person and virtual meetings. And so, I would say there's a lapse on my part of saying, oh, I formatted this PowerPoint for accessibility. Make sure you're sharing it with staff members this way or that way, because ultimately the materials that were shared were not accessible. So that could be guidance on using virtual meeting platforms, sharing information like agendas and supplementary materials in advance so that people who have screen readers or cognitive disabilities and might want more processing time to look at information, kind of all of those best practices. So that's kind of where we're standing from the communications side of thing. And you can see how these all roll in together. So it's like make the format of the communication accessible and then make sure the things you're communicating talk about, and serve the needs of the community and so on and so forth. So I'd love to hear any feedback around instances where communication has perhaps failed you, and if this addresses those concerns or if there are areas we can strengthen them.
Terry?
I think it's all good. But the one thing I might consider is So this is good in terms of looking to make the communications. Usually it's our website, it's anyways, and sometimes ads in the Peninsula region. But I think in some cases, I think we can take it a step further, look at what are the other channels that we have access to that we could use to get our message out. So for example, I'm thinking about well, accessibility plan, maybe active transportation plan, or we're doing other plans. And so there's community partners like the Shoal Center, who has a list of organizations that deals get the message out to the White Cane Club, you know, the Sidney Community Association. Jennifer has a whole list of organizations that we could tap into and just, you know, have an email go out all at once to those organizations. So, you know, just like we were talking earlier about taking that extra effort in our recruitment strategies, not just to make the poster accessible, but to take that extra step to reach out to the community to make sure that they get.
Right, because who cares if the poster's in large print or braille format if people who need those formats don't ever have access to it, yeah.
Yeah, so.
And I think it is, sometimes it's even just knowing that it's there as well. Especially as we're learning it through this process. I think it's really important to check in with the users. Like Vanessa has been an incredible resource for me with this committee and the school district committee, and you know, asking, was this accessible, or running my documents past her, and how are they formatted for her with her assistive technologies. Try to make them as accessible as possible. So there's that resource here too that could really be drawn upon.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Oh.
Charlene.
Communications as well is utilizing SPAAC communications. You know, we only meet every 2 months, so there is a gap, but it's community. Sure, can you circulate this to you? Because it's the same thing. Once I knew the survey had come out on this, I then approached my healthcare. I then approached people that I knew. So we are a source of communication as well, and use us. Even like, don't wait for the meeting to ask us to do something, but fire something out for us and say, hey, can you help us get this word?
That's a really good point. Like, we've all got our own networks. And there's an incredible capacity there to disseminate information at, you know, no cost, and then fairly quickly as well.
Terms that people are more receptive to receive the information as a trusted source. If it's the person that you know kind of built that relationship with, you probably pay more attention to it than to see something that's you know, got a municipal government address attached to it. I mean,
and that speaks to just knowing that information's there. Like Vanessa didn't know about a large portion of our agenda because, you know, she couldn't see it, and her assistive technology didn't tell her that it was there. And I think that's a big piece that's missing, not just for the disability community, but for the community in general. They don't know that this information's there or where to get it.
Yeah, and it's actually not something that I've ever incorporated into recommendations that I've written for clients about, you know, major communications best practices that now I'm going to rethink and add to the checklist, which is even when you're sending something and saying, you know, in this email, you should find X, Y, and Z. And then if you can't find it, then you know there's something missing. And so you'd like to at least know what you're missing. I mean, hopefully you're not missing anything, but at the very least, that would improve. So
yeah, well, and with sorry, Vanessa, I'm using you as an example today, but when we get stuff that's, or I'm sending out information that's in a table, I know that it's incredibly difficult for her to interact with that. So what I do is I provide a summary at the top. This is sort of the overall themes or the summary of the content of that table, because otherwise she's listening to row 1, column 1.
Row 2, column 3, row 4, column 3.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go in the order or anything. Yeah.
Yeah.
And anybody that wants to learn how it comes across on my phone and things like that, I'm more than happy to volunteer my time to teach them and show them or work with them, whatever.
Chair.
Oh, Gord?
Thank you. And I apologize if I cut somebody off again. Audio is super challenging from this end. But I just think this meeting, if nothing else, is a microcosm of the challenges that certainly local governments have about how to get that information out there with trying to do the best. And there's so many different formats and methods to do that. And so I think this is a learning process for all of us as to how to engage and go through that with our residents and with the people in our community. And it's, even to Vanessa's point about the challenges that she had, but maybe there's even just different apps that are reading things differently. And so how do we try to compile all of that information into a format that is available to everyone? Certainly is opening my eyes at the difficulties and challenges that we have collectively to try to be able to do this. It's been, fascinating to listen to this conversation in this way.
Thank you, Gord. Lorraine?
Yeah, I just want to support that last comment. I think that the key piece learning for me is, it's about understanding and having the conversations. And for instance, just as an example, with this playground going in at Green, the fact that, I have a relationship with the chair in terms of this working group, I feel, inviting David to say, hey, here's the playground. What are your thoughts from your perspective? Or, with the fact that Vanessa, we have these resources in our community that I think wouldn't be hard to reach out to Arlene and just to be aware before going forward in terms of that whole accessibility framework, that we have this incredible resource in our 3 communities, and just take the time. I see this as key stakeholders. It would be no different than any other engagement. If you're wanting to build a pool, who are the key stakeholders that need to be at the table to have the conversations to figure out that you're proceeding in the right way? It just seems unnatural to me.
And the thing that I advise most of my clients is sort of getting it right, not being right, which means that you humble yourself and, the areas that you don't know how to do it, ask the people who do. And I think that's, kind of the simplest way to express it. And I think that's a big barrier for a lot of people, and we kind of incorporate it into our training. It's like the ask the person philosophy. Like, because there's ego involved. Oh, I don't want to offend. I want to make sure that I seem like I know what I'm talking about. I want to, and rather than saying like, I know it's important to get this right. I know I don't have the tools to get it right. Where do I get those tools? It's critical. Do we have a time check, just in the interest of time and advancing through the
11:15. Yeah.
Just doing some math. I think we do need to move on.
Yeah.
So in terms of transportation, this one is, a bit of a challenging area because we know that the transportation needs and, in each of the municipalities is a little different. So Sidney's more walkable versus North Saanich. We also know that a lot of the transit gaps exist at the BC government level, not the municipal level. So we did our best to capture the concerns of the community within, what is in the purview of the municipalities. So prioritizing accessibility. So when planning transportation projects, ensuring accessibility is a key consideration. So this again kind of goes back to the idea of an accessibility checklist, but in this case, it's for transportation projects. It can be captured through works in progress where accessibility has already been included. So active transportation plans for some of the municipalities already do mention accessibility. And so as the next plan for a transportation project goes forward, you can consult that, precursor and say, oh, we're making good on a promise that we made earlier. It could also be an upcoming work, such as updates to transportation master plans or engineering standards. So I think the other important part is prioritizing plans that address known accessibility barriers. So making these look pretty is great, but making them functional is better. And so keeping those in mind and prioritizing increased safety as well. So I think more than anything, we heard for residents that it was safety of intersections that was really a key issue. Of course, consulting people with disabilities. So I think we had a chat about this last time about crosswalks and patterns on crosswalks and how the lines are delineated. So, you know, there might be assumptions about what works best, but consulting people with disabilities and designs and user review of designs is really important. And then sourcing expertise. So whether that's internal staff or external vendors, making sure they have expertise and experience designing and building accessible spaces. So this is where I think your points were well taken. We've including accessibility as a project parameter in RFPs. And not just, oh, sure, we can do that, but have you done it? To show us you have done it is really important. Active transportation, so developing project-specific approaches for active transportation that's responsive to concerns about accessibility. That sounds like, what do you mean? There was some commentary from residents that they weren't sure how bike lanes might impact parking spaces or how they might have accessible parking spaces or what that might look like at bus stops and so on and so forth. So different needs, different priorities, different user experiences. And so I think, you know, I know it's a bit of a brouhaha in the community, so I'm not going to get into the bike lanes, don't worry, Corey. But the point is that there is some, I think, misinformation around what is and isn't barrier to accessibility and how these things can actually be folded into, because then other residents said, oh, well, actually, I have, you know, to get around independently, I like to use an e-bike. Because it conserves my energy rather than walking. To me, a bike like promotes accessibility and so on and so forth. So I'll let, you know, staff speak for themselves on that. And then with transit, working with BC Transit to improve accessible transit options. So that could include service delivery, but even information and bus stop design. So what are the routes? What does wayfinding look like there? What does the signage look like on whether it's, you know, websites advertising routes or whether it's signage at the stops? Those were areas that we identified as important. So with that in mind, I'd love, and this is a really important area, I don't want to shortchange it, so I'd love to hear feedback about how this aligns with your needs as community members.
I'll just throw one little piece in there that with the bus stops. The stops themselves are municipal jurisdiction. Done in conjunction with BC Transit. So if like a lot of our bus stops in our rural areas aren't accessible, they can't put their ramps down on that. So you know, that's one of the areas where this committee can have a direct influence on. Whereas the transit routes and stuff, we might be able to support our local transit commission representative, which I believe is Ryan Windsor at Central Saanich now. Yeah. But that's provincial level that we don't have a whole lot of influence over.
The only thing that I would add is it would probably come under this transportation, I guess, get into more detail on that, but a lot lately in terms of multi-use paths and concerns about people who are, say, moving with walkers and meeting with people on e-bikes that are going, people in motorized scooters. So when we get to the point where we're talking design and how to accommodate with multiple users, you know, somebody who's blind or somebody who's deaf, you know, doesn't hear, you know, somebody here, and he might coming along.
Right. They do the ting ting, get out of my way, and well, that's not.
So there's just kind of being,
yeah,
those sorts.
Okay, moving right along.
So now there's two for this, so you can run through them all and then I'll go back.
Okay, sounds good. So buildings, infrastructure, and public spaces is a big one. So planning for accessibility, this is a theme that's come throughout all the recommendations. So that, you know, nothing happens without accessibility being incorporated at the planning stages. So that could be renovations, updates, or new construction. And then consulting people with disabilities in the planning stages. So I think we're kind of all in agreement on that one. Engineering specifications. So there are municipal engineering specifications that are developed and updated. So we heard from some municipal staff that they felt that it made sense to actually add accessibility or improve or extend the concept of accessibility within those specifications as they're due for renewal. I don't know enough about that to speak more intelligently. Planning framework. So develop a standard accessibility review process for staff involved in designing new municipal spaces. So this is includes the idea of when and how to integrate accessibility into those planning and projects. So it goes back to what we were talking in earlier recommendations, but ensuring that basically from the get-go of project launch, and then those people who would be assigned on the project to say, like, it's not just oh, we put the ramp here and it's done, but the broader picture, what that looks like, who's going to build it, who's going to be involved in, commentary on design. So the framework really being that foolproof way of saying, look, you're a planner, or you're an engineer, you're not necessarily an accessibility specialist. We're going to remind you of the checkpoints of how these things need to be considered. Signage, so when updating or replacing municipal signage, integrating accessibility features into new design. So that could be plain language, greater color contrast, tactile information, all of those things. Washrooms, we heard a lot of feedback on, so identifying and implementing opportunities to increase the number of public and accessible washrooms. And then when designing these washrooms, to consider different user needs, including adults with disabilities. So, depending on people's toileting needs, they may actually need support for like adult changing stations. So ensuring that these washrooms are clearly identified on public information kiosks, or using other kind of wayfinding elements to let users know that there are accessible washrooms. And I think this speaks to sort of, a multitude of needs, just that there need to be more of them, but also that people with certain disabilities, the toileting needs may be greater than others. So the frequency of usage or what that looks like. So again, it's not just a wheelchair accessible stall, but it's actually thinking about a broader user experience of people who might want to go in those public spaces. And just, to preserve obviously the dignity and community participation of everybody to be able to take care of those hygiene needs. And then mobility device infrastructure. So identifying opportunities to increase infrastructure for electric mobility devices. So there are some e-bike chargers throughout the town. Our understanding is that some power wheelchairs and e-scooters are compatible with these charging stations. Others are not. So that would be with parking charging stations. And then again, ensuring these charging stations are clearly identified at public kiosks, and that they're thought of as an accessibility feature in the town. So it goes back to that communication. It may not be that there is a lack of infrastructure to charge electronic mobility devices, but it's a lack of knowledge about where they are, how to access them, that they're available. That's important. Public seating. So Corey knows in my stays here, I've fallen in love with the town of Sidney. There's so many things I like about it, except all those very large benches that have very large statues on it that nobody can actually use. So we heard from residents that they'd like to see the increased availability of public seating, including accessible benches. And so for some people, this is actually like a health issue, because if they have, they're ambulatory, but they have limited mobility, that they need places to rest frequently, or if they have chronic health conditions such as respiratory issues, that they still want to maintain the level of function that they're at, but in order to do that and continue to recreate in the town, that they may need places of rest. And so ensuring that the design and construction of the seating accommodations is for a range of body types and abilities as well. And so that may include, you don't want impediments on the bench, but it could include armrests on the side of the bench so that somebody can lower themselves with support, things like that. Parking.
Chair,
So
if I may.
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll be quick. Just around the public seating component was just at the UBCM, and while they had accessible seating available, I think people and organizations need to consider where they're placing that accessible, and putting it in the back if somebody sitting low in a wheelchair may not have access to presenters or speakers at the front of the chamber or the room. So just not only to have it, but where that is within aspect of the space in the room.
Yeah, or in constructing benches in outdoor public spaces as well, making sure they're not blocking the path of others who would need right of way as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Gord.
With parking, so ensuring the adequate provision of accessible parking spaces that are aligned with best practices and community needs, and as opportunities arise. So we know that the provision of accessible parking spaces that would accommodate side loading bans was an issue across the community. So that's something that the municipalities are keen to take a look at. And first, or I should say first and foremost, but perhaps foremost, the thing that we heard most often from residents was that they would like an alignment of bylaws where possible. So the municipalities are trying to commit to working to develop consistent accessibility standards where public spaces are concerned. So for example, consistency and accessibility of crosswalks, sidewalks, intersections, because we know that, you know, these being small municipalities, chances are you live, work, and recreate in all three to a certain extent. And so just kind of knowing what you can count on and depend on and how to cross, you know, or road safety safely, pardon me, is really important. So some alignment there so that those are kind of standardized. And then that goes back to all the other recommendations would say, and when you're standardizing these things, talk to people with disabilities to figure out how you can design them to the best and most user effective standard.
I went back to the top.
Yep, great. So it's a whole lot thrown at you there. I'm sorry that we're coming short on time, but we'd love to get your feedback where possible on some of these issues.
Councillor Newton.
Thank you. Just a quick suggestion on Councillor Newton's comment there on the, I think, number 27, is it? Just maybe a quick amendment to say ensure that the design, location, and construction of this seating accommodates.
I like it. I like those words.
It's not uncommon if you go to a movie theater, you're either sitting in the very front row or the very back row, neither of which is particularly good.
And quite often you sit by yourself or you're with one friend.
Yeah.
One thing I wasn't sure if it was covered off here was, they were talking about public spaces, but what I recall hearing a lot about them recently, we heard about access to outdoor spaces like parks and the water. And I don't know if is it covered off here? It doesn't feel like it is. So, you know, the issue was, we've, like in Sidney, for example, 17 parks. Many of those are along the waterfront and they're just not accessible. So whether that's something we need to add into here, like looking at outdoor spaces as well as indoor spaces, is it captured?
I think I would direct that question to the municipalities of my interpretation is that it would be captured.
Okay.
Perhaps there's isn't. So if we need to add more specific language or.
Yeah, I kind of see it as fitting in number 23, so the planning framework. So when designing new or improving existing public spaces, that those are kept in mind. I know the district of Central Saanich is embarking on a parks master plan, and that's certainly an element. And I would hope, that staff have been involved with all this, and are learning more and being trained more. That as they embark on these projects, it should hopefully, like the checklist, become an inherent thought that you bring to it, just like consultation has become over the last 10 years. But I think, from my perspective, when I look at this as a staff person, I see that still captured in 23 without being so specific as to just be beaches or just be parks.
Okay, I guess I was wondering, that's good to know that in future planning processes, it would be incorporated. But I'm wondering whether there would be an action item to, what do we do about the existing? No, I think one of the things that recommendations when we had discussed this previously was doing an accessibility audit of our outdoor spaces and identifying those that were lacking in terms of accessibility. So I don't know if do we feel like that's included there? So I get the point about planning future, and I think we're starting to move in that direction, but the existing. So if it's not included,
Yeah, I would say it's not included in the recommendations there, and something for us to discuss and review. Yeah.
That was one of our, in the draft that we had. One of the things we had, identify and remove barriers to accessibility, our parks, trails, beaches, other. And then the other thing I was going to comment was about the built environment. I see that in regards to the planning, we're having standards for public buildings. I'm wondering, I know some municipalities extend that to private development. So when development, I think it's Burnaby, for example, when they have, say, a multifamily development going up, they require the developer to have a consultant or someone who is experienced in all the features of the BC building code that deal with accessibility plus other best practices to make sure that it's, the building is accessible. Or at least to have a checklist, so that when we go to review these applications, that we know that, okay, yeah, all of these things. So I don't know if we're doing that already. I haven't seen it in Sydney, I don't know if others do it, but whether that's something that we might consider as well.
I'm just gonna chime in. I might look to the planners. There's a lot of them. I know the BC building code is being reviewed and updated and released this fall, and
Yeah.
for like the preview that we've been given has been that it will be high on accessibility. So from the standpoint of the municipality, often that's our building process, is to ensure that the building code is complied with. And it is somewhat more difficult when you are trying to encourage things like housing to have the greater standard.
Yeah.
But we understand that the new building code, and I think all three councils have been given direction from this committee to be sure to incorporate the new standards. I believe it, it will be included there.
Just following up on that, Councillor Newton again. I mean, the building code's a tricky one because the Building Act, which implements the building code in the province, doesn't allow, except for a few exceptions, accessibility is still one of them for now, but it's ending, I think, fairly soon. The Building Act doesn't allow municipalities to regulate by bylaw beyond what the code requires. So we can't require anything beyond, say, what the code says about hallway widths or something like that. At the same time, we have to meet the code. So it's a very exacting standard. And so really the building inspectors are there to make sure the building meets that exact standard. And as far as I know, that's what they do and go in there. So I mean, a checklist would, I think, essentially just mirror the building code. And so the building code is in essence a checklist of what needs to be done until the province decides that maybe municipalities do have the responsibility again to, or okay to go beyond the code and to give us that power. It's really not much else. And just, if I might, on the arts, I think I agree with you. It's probably a good thing to do sort of a retroactive assessment of parks. My concern there would be is that very much like sidewalks, in that some of this infrastructure is very, very expensive. So I know a lot of residents like to have a expectation that one of the municipalities is going and put a sidewalk here. Well, that's $250,000 concrete and labor and everything. So I just be concerned about maybe tempering some expectations that we can't snap our fingers and install this infrastructure in 2 years and get it done.
Yeah.
It's a much longer process.
Oh, yeah.
Frustrating as it is, we've seen better success with, and some of these recommendations do capture that, when something is due for update or improvement, the audit happens then, it is improved to new standard, because what ends up happening is if the expectation is for a large number of projects, you get shortchanged on time, resources, and so you're probably retrofitting and tapping on kind of core accessibility features rather than when something's time is due to make it maximally accessible, which is an imperfect answer, because I mean that means that there are places that remain inaccessible for longer than shorter. But I think in terms of directing resources, it's been our experience that is kind of the better, more complete use of resources, especially because just doing audits themselves could be hundreds of thousands, if not in the millions of dollars. And what gets done with those audits? There may be nothing done with them because the capital is there. And so you say, oh, we spent $1 million to find out everything that's wrong. So yes, I appreciate the thought, because again, in a perfect world, that would happen. But probably when updates are due, it makes more sense.
So one of the other hats I wear is the president of the Central Saanich Community Association, and that tempering the community's expectations seems to be a big part of my job there now, because Central Saanich in particular, we're a rural community, largely agricultural land reserve, so there just isn't the tax base to be going out and spending money on sidewalks. That's why you see a lot of those gravel sidewalks, but with a fine, well-compacted gravel that's properly engineered in that. David, you had a comment.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the comment forward of plowing over the conversation's already started. It's a reality check, but reality really is that the legal documents go. And it's a restriction. Fairness to the builders and contractors. It's not their responsibility. Other people. The whole act. Maybe there needs to be something there. To band together, have a way to facilitate. So.
I think that's, well stated, and the feedback and energy that I've heard today indicates that something that can help, that kind of gets around the legislation is just a culture change in the community. And so if it's working with local businesses, chambers of commerce, business associations, if you're aware of a grant that a business can apply for that can help them make accessibility improvements, I mean, I know it's extra labor. It's unfortunate that that sort of emotional labor gets passed on, but because the more opportunities people have to make the right choices for accessibility, the better. And then that just kind of snowballs because it becomes the way of the community. And, oh, well, my neighbor next door did this for business and look how well they're doing. Maybe I ought to make these improvements. And then I think you would hope it would snowball to new developers. But if it's like, this is sort of who we are, this is the character of our community. And if you want to be successful here or have people buy your units, well, we have pretty high expectations of accessibility around here. But it is, it's a collective effort that does require a lot of personal legwork.
And we are seeing some of that too. The last development proposal that was brought to the committee here for comment, but it did include the number of adaptable units and things like 2 elevators for redundancy and lots of great accessibility enhancements beyond the minimum of the code.
All right, so we'll go on to public awareness engagement. So that, perfectly dovetails with the comment that I just made. So public education, developing and launching a public education campaign on accessibility in the municipalities. So it could include things like why it's a priority, how the municipalities are taking action towards accessibility, and how the public can engage with it. So again, this becoming kind of a collective community spirit thing that we want to be accessible to everybody. We want everybody to feel comfortable and able to live, work, and recreate here. So it could be through social media messaging, dedicated web pages to accessibility. I mean, there's going to be a great opportunity when the accessibility plans are published and put out by the municipalities. Like it's, that's a great conversation starter right there. And so the purpose of it is really to raise awareness around accessibility, but as importantly, to reduce attitudinal barriers to accessibility so that it isn't that, what are you talking about? You can't do that job. Or what do you mean that I should care about this? So that when recommendations come forward and you're saying, whether something goes to council or whether you're just talking to a local business about a need that you have, if that is sort of starting to be culturally ingrained, it kind of goes, oh, yeah, that makes sense versus, well, this sounds like a pain in the butt. What are you talking about? So that culture shift is really important. And then it gives a forum for engagement around accessibility. So once again, you're a fantastic group of representatives here, but the conversation can and should extend beyond this group. And so if people know where and how they can speak up and speak out and inform accessibility, that would be great. And then something that actually you mentioned as you started this meeting about Indigenous representation. So currently SPAAC doesn't have any Indigenous members, and the Accessible British Columbia Act for their accessibility advisory committees requires it. But we will say that the municipalities need to take sustained efforts to build relationships. And so I think it's actually more important not to have a token representative, but to establish a bona fide relationship that somebody would say, I want a seat at the table. I'm interested in participating in that. And that hasn't been the case for SPAAC yet. And I know that this is a challenge for a lot of municipalities and other entities. And so this becomes about relationship building there. But I think much like thinking about how a meeting might look for accessibility, there are other ways of knowing and ways of sharing information that are specific to Indigenous communities. And so those could be, you know, changes that could be forthcoming. What are the terms of reference of SPAAC look like? Where are the meetings held? How are they held? Because other members of Indigenous communities might say, this just doesn't feel like the space that I want to be, or this doesn't feel like a forum of how I prefer to share ideas. So something certainly to think about. The public awareness and engagement is slim on recommendations. So any amendments or additions or comments about what we've got there?
Terry?
Just thinking about, be nice to include the business community in there somewhere in that public education. So, because like, you know, we hear lots of complaints about getting access to businesses, not having automatic payment. A lot of those things are things that we heard from staff that we can't require them to do.
Yeah.
But heightening their awareness of these things also is an issue with private businesses as well. So whether the municipal governments can play a role in reaching out to the business community, say, here's some things you could your business more accessible and maybe even increase your number of people coming to your business.
Yeah, even just resources on, as you say, the business case, right, around it. What are you losing by not investing?
And there's all sorts of different opportunities. One of the other agenda items is Accessible Parking Awareness Month, which is sponsored through the Social Planning Research Council BC. And in the briefing note I put together, I included a number of their social media posts from last year that have really good, clear pictures and a description. And it's just education around accessible parking and things like snow being piled in it, or the fact that the person with the disability has to leave the vehicle if you're going to use that spot. Otherwise, you don't need an accessible spot. So there's all sorts of tools there already available too that we could be sharing with the community.
Got just one more pillar left, so well done. And that's in procurement. We've talked about this in the other areas. So it's just as matter of fact is updating procurement policies to incorporate accessibility considerations where applicable. And so ensuring that any vendors who are coming to the table and wanting to do work for and with the municipalities, that they know that that's an expectation, and it will, you know, sort of be spelled out in the RFP of what that looks like and what the requirements are.
Terry.
In addition to that, I wonder if you had thought about some communities are using social values such as accessibility as an evaluation criteria in procurement. So it's not just about we're doing a playground, we want you to build an accessible structure. It could be we're just hiring somebody to provide computers to the town. And part of our evaluation criteria is not just going to be, you know, that they meet these technical requirements and but that we also infuse social values in our procurement process, which means that we might ask them for a statement of how do you support accessibility in your organization. So, but I know that that's something that's being promulgated within BC with procurement and in other provinces. So.
Yeah, if nothing else, who are we giving our money to, right?
Yeah, it's just another way through our procurement process to drive the kind of changes we want to see.
That brings us to the end of the recommendations. So beyond what was here, was there anything that wasn't here?
One thing I did note is a lot of communications talks about website social media. There, I work with seniors. There are quite a few seniors that just are digitally literate, and they become less and less so. And so, just something other than finding another way to communicate these things out, other than going to a website social media, connecting with cultural recreation centers and service groups that get the word out to their group.
Yeah, I think there was some language, but I think we could strengthen the language by saying, you know, ensuring and retaining a variety of formats of communication. So where some might say like, oh, we're gonna drop the phone number, we don't need the phone number. Well, maybe do the phone number, you know, to seek information. So yeah, we can make a refinement to language there, certainly.
The facts.
That maybe. Talk to your doctors. Okay, that's, yeah, formats and channels, yep, like that.
Monitor the technology channel
And both.
refers to the process. So like exactly what Jennifer said about tapping into the Shoal Center, the Viking Club, other. The other just comment and conclusion stuff, my thoughts were more along the like tracking and reporting on this and what we're going to measure. I know this in you talked about having smart goals and objectives when we come to writing the actual plan. So I wonder if you, maybe now's not the time, but some other time I'd be interested to hear what sort of measurement criteria you would recommend. So whether we, you know, there's often a tendency to measure things, like we accomplish this many things, but rather than outcome. And so we would be interested to get more information about that. And I think it's important when we have the plan that there's some time limit. So it's a 3-year plan. So identifying what are we going to do in year 1, year 2, year 3, and then there's going to be some reporting on that, rather than just saying, here's a plan, there needs to be implementation measurement.
So it's beyond the scope of our current contract, although we're around for the implementation stages, absolutely.
Yeah, it was a
Other clients that we've had who've worked with the Accessible Canada Act and who have accessibility plans that are already a year old or 6 months old, there's a requirement for progress reports that incorporate community feedback. And I think that's actually a really important unit of measurement in terms of progress, because there's the things like how many of this did we do, or when did we do it, what did we do, but then did it meet the need? And so engaging in increasing consultation with disability communities around that progress reporting to say, okay, we did the thing, did we do it right? What can we do better next time? Is really effective, especially because these plans are only 3 years, which means, well, you know it, we'll have to do this all again. And so so those progress reports are actually really key, because people kind of already like drawing the roadmap for you of what the next plan is going to look like, because plans are imperfect, plans change. And so where you succeeded, you'll want to retain or expand those goals. Where you fell short of the goals, you can recommit to or change the goals in the next plan. So I know that has been something that a lot of our clients have been really successful with. And it's required a lot of advanced thought. Like it's not the progress report's due in 2 months. It's kind of like a 6 to 8 months ahead of time thing of how were we reaching these people. And again, so is it through SPAAC, reaching out to Shoal Center and needed services and what have you, to say, oh, they're probably going to want input from us soon. What would that look like? What kind of feedback and format would that be? Would it be a survey? Would it be roundtables? Would it just be at a SPAAC meeting? Are all things that the municipalities can think about. Hopefully they're listening. Thoughts?
Any other questions or comments?
Come on, Haley, get here for
Well, I'd like to thank you. I think this is, I was really encouraged reading the report. And I think, especially when I look around at other communities and organizations that are working towards compliance, I look at Saanich Peninsula here and the work that we started 1.5 years, 2 years ago. I think it's really put us in a good position. There's been some growing pains and stuff along the way, and there's going to continue to be, but overall, I'd like to thank everyone that's got us to this stage, and especially you guys and the work that you've done.
It's your pleasure. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the incredibly useful feedback. It's wonderful. I was taking notes and Emily was taking notes, so that is terrific.
Right on. I'll let you get yourself sorted out there, and we'll try to quickly get through the rest of the the agenda here. Next item 6, council referrals. There's nothing listed under item 6. So, all right, so number 7, council updates, including the tracking sheet. So the tracking sheet's there for our information. I don't think there's anything new to update on that. So we'll start with Sidney as our host. Council update, Terry?
Nothing.
Nothing? Okay. Phil from North Saanich. Anything from North Saanich?
No, nothing. We did bring that design crosswalk referral forward, which was passed by council, but other than that, we're just yeah, we're moving along.
Okay, thanks, Phil. And Gord from Central Saanich.
I could be quick on this. The big one that's coming forward will be the Parks Master Plan. It was initially discussed at council's meeting Monday night, but until there's something to bring forward to SPAAC, we'll just wait and see. But that's the sort of next big project from Central Saanich's perspective, where I can see having some input or some significant input from SPAAC on it. So stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Gord. Anything from staff that you guys want to bring up for other municipalities? Oh, okay. Right on. Other items. So there was a letter received that went to the Capital Regional District about Island View Beach. Oh, sorry, Vanessa, I'm clicking my pen here.
He knows.
She does. And it was extending the camping period there and the ability to book. And for those of you that don't know, the IACDI is the Intermunicipal Advisory Committee on Disability Issues. Oh, sorry, Emily.
I'm just going to chime in because Island View Beach is actually in the district of Central Saanich. It is a CRD Park. Central Saanich approves the temporary use permit that allows the parking. So as part of the last renewal that came in the last 6 months, for the parking, we did ask CRD to extend the camping kind of season at the Island View Beach, and the temporary use permit wasn't conditional on it, but it was conditional that they look at it and include it in their Island View Beach work plan, something like that, master plan, and that they will look at it. Obviously, they can't do it for this year, obviously, and they didn't have necessarily the staff, but they did commit to looking at extending that at the request of council, and obviously the members of the community are asking for it.
Fantastic. It's nice to hear success stories like this. Thank you, Emily, and I appreciate Central Saanich's involvement in that. I wasn't aware of that. So yeah, so that's that.
I'll just chime in and say that this came from Councillor Riddle's notice of motion to look at this. So I'll just throw out the props where props are due and give her the credit for it.
Right on. Okay, next item. Oh, sorry, any other questions or comments on that one? Okay. Next item is Accessible Parking Awareness Month. As I mentioned earlier, it's an awareness campaign that the Social Planning and Research Council BC runs each year. Last year, they did a number of social media posts. They've done videos in the past around barriers with accessible parking. Some of the themes include vehicles parking in the striped access aisle, proper use of your permit conditions, because these are things that people, I want to say, they forget over time. But the snow one is actually a topical one, because there was a community feedback to Sidney about that. And so this is part of that awareness so that we can help the businesses and whatnot in the community, meet expectations and when it comes to things like accessible parking. I brought it forward because I was hoping that our municipalities could help us out this year with messaging in that. I don't know if we want to discuss here about it, or because I know we're pressed for time. This is coming up before our next meeting. So I'm going to look to the councillors and staff to see if you want to discuss it more here, or if you'd like to sort of have an offline conversation about it.
If the committee were just to make sort of a general recommendation to their councils that they support or have a communications strategy during November to support accessibility, parking accessibility, is that kind of you know, general enough to give that direction without getting into a huge conversation now. And
Perfect.
and use the resources provided by the.
And I would say not strategy, because in comms language, that's like a document, but promote the campaign as far.
Did you get that, Sandy? Yeah. I'll say what she said.
I'm still trying to get an update from SPAAC BC what their plans are for this year. So would it be best for me to communicate that to the councillors and then have them bring that to the staff that's going to be looking after communications on this?
And you can check directly with staff, that's fine. I know our team is already having it on our social media calendar. Because they saw the agenda and saw that it was coming up. And our planning department gave us some input. It's specific to Central Saanich. I think the motion is great. And any resources can be shared directly with us.
Okay.
And just a note, I did talk to our communication manager. She said that they try and keep their campaigns and posts on what is happening in the community now. That seems to get people involved. So like, you know, when it's winter, snow removal, getting that out about that, and being aware that way rather than just on a specific awareness month or whatnot. But that's what she likes to do with the posts, and it seems to resonate with us. Look at those things.
I think that's good too, that they're gonna do it all year round. I think the good thing about doing it in the months where it's accessible parking month is that people get hit numerous times from all locations, from multiple organizations, municipalities, so that message kind of gets.
Yeah, and I think from her lens, there's a lot of awareness campaigns out there. So it's just she likes to keep it local. What's happening here in our community, resonating with our community, because it's hard to pick when you've got like an awareness week for this, a month for this, but definitely this is something we can do.
Lorraine and then Charlene.
Yeah, I just would like to mention too that with that piece around accessible parking, Panorama would definitely like to be involved as well, because on our lot, parking is something that we want to really municipality, so the messaging gets out in our center as well. So we'd like to be involved with them.
Yeah, and this is sort of a first year for us with this too, so it's not going to be something big and fancy. Charlene?
As somebody in our community on the Peninsula, being accessible is absolutely paramount. It is, so to me, it's not just a casual awareness of anything else that's going on. It affects my life daily. My life is restricted by that. And I think, I can't tell you how many times I go into Sidney, I go into Broadmead, I go into wherever, and I can't get parking because it's being abused. It doesn't fit what it does. And I can go into Save On Food and say, come on, guys, what are you doing? Don't listen to me. I can go to any other place and say, come on. They don't listen to me. They act like they've never heard it before. I think if there is something that comes out from our municipalities that just say, hey guys, be aware this is successful parking. Take a look at your lot. Do you have proper parking? Are you meeting the standards? Are you missing out on business by not providing this? They're going to pay no attention to what the municipality is saying. And so I think it is important to support this. To just say, because there are, I can tell you, and I'd like to take any one of you out with me for a week, show you how there's a lot of things I can't do because I can't. And it's abuse by people who are only going to be a minute. It's abuse by contractors who don't think their building supplies prevent a problem if they're just using the accessible parking for a moment. The stores feel it's okay to pile up their extra merchandise in them because it's not. And as far as the snow, I don't walk for a couple of weeks after snow because typically accessible spots are used to pile up snow. Well, that snow takes forever to melt. So my friends are out going out for coffee and lunches again, but they'll call me and say, Charlene, don't bother coming down, you're not going to get. So to me, this is huge. This affects my life every day. And I'd like to see the awareness brought up and just reminded, because people do. If it doesn't affect you every day, you don't think. But it,
Thank you, Shelley. Terry. Oh, wait, Sandy.
Just a suggestion, the town can't enforce parking use for private business, so maybe that's something the SPIA can get involved in, promoting that and communicating with the local business community. That might be an idea as well. Good segue into my question. Because I heard Charlene's comment, and there's a letter here as well. Parking at City Hall and Home Lot there. I know that Bucker Fields and Central Saanich is an issue. They pile up their extra goods and stuff there. So currently we're not able, it's not in our bylaws. So do we have the authority to change that? Do we have the authority to make an amendment to our parking bylaws to say businesses shall not use acceptable parking spaces other than for, like, can we do that? I don't know if we could do that.
I can only speak to like DNS's bylaw and others of other jurisdictions I've worked for. It's embedded in the parking information, like parking sections of the bylaw or the parking bylaw, depending on if it's embedded in the zoning bylaw or not, that accessible spaces shall only be used for the intended use. So it's embedded. The challenge is that any business that has been constructed at a certain time was required to meet those parking standards at that time. So you cannot apply new parking standards and develop new bylaw requirements and then enforce those retroactively on those businesses.
I get that, but I guess what I'm wondering is, if you save on foods and hardware and other fields, presumably they were required years ago to provide accessible parking spaces. And now they're using them to pile snow and extra bags of topsoil. So can we not enforce that? Like if the spaces are not being made available for that purpose, why can't we do something like that? Or do we have to change something in our bylaw to allow for enforcement? Is that something that I could make a motion to recommend to staff to look into options? Just like that. Sure. That's what do you think?
Corey, check out one minute here.
Just thinking of the town of Sidney's MTI bylaw, which is the basis for enforcement and issuing fines for things. The categories are fairly general. So there's things like contravention of the zoning bylaw or contravention of the off-street parking and loading bylaw. So I mean, if your off-street parking and loading bylaw requires X number of spaces with X number of dimensions and things like that, I would say yes, it's possible. The tricky part is when it's a legacy property and standards have changed over time. And if they met the requirements back in the day or exceeded the requirement, for example, and say they require 10 parking spaces on their property. In 1979, they built 15 spaces, and they've got 5 of those spaces currently filled with dirt or building supplies or whatever. Technically, they've got those 10 spaces, and they're in compliance with the bylaws. So,
yeah,
it's a very specific situation-specific thing.
But what I'm thinking about, I think they want foods, home hardware, Bucker Fields. They've got some spaces, but anyways, is it worth making a referral to look at other options to deal with it?
Sandy?
They can make a recommendation.
It's very situation dependent, but it can be done. And if there was, I think already, if there was an egregious sort of like, if it was something very obvious, like the 2 accessible spaces that are go out and enforce the bylaw and issue a ticket if necessary.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm looking at the letter from a community member that has sent a complaint. And our response back to that person is, nothing we can do about it, go talk to city on. And try to encourage them. So I think if we have some sort of leverage or angle, it does seem to be an issue that comes up. Okay, so Sandy can make a motion and be done with it. So can I make a motion that the councils ask staff to review options to address would it be abuse of enforcement, proper use of accessible parking spaces?
I mean, I would say those mechanisms are already in place and staff are well aware of them. You know, I don't know about the Save on Foods circumstance, but I would say if staff have said, look, there's nothing we can do in this situation, then it might be something like what I just spoke about, which is, you know, for whatever reason, a legacy reason on the property or something like that, we don't have the, you know, in some respect, they're meeting the bylaw and we can't go out there and say, no, you're not.
Yeah,
compliance.
talking about the use of parking spots there.
Yeah,
And
I
available,
understand,
but I understand the legacy thing, I totally get that, but I guess, so I'll make the motion, there's a second or.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sure, Charlene? Okay. For her went up faster. Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Sorry, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, passed unanimously. And one comment I'd just like to make, if we find that it's going to be too difficult to do something like that, if there's maybe the committee and the municipalities could work together on education and a piece that can come out. I know that previously when the Central Saanich bylaw was updated, there was talk about maybe putting something out with the quarterly newsletter. Education is a great way to go too, because it doesn't get backed up.
yeah, so the word options.
Yeah.
Options, it would be education.
Yeah. Lee.
Also, linkages to the business community. I know I've written letters to Sidney Business Improvement Association, and they didn't respond to me at all.
Yeah.
So it's like going to save on getting a response. It's kind of useless. But if we could use some leverage from the municipalities.
Yeah.
Really help.
Yeah, because otherwise, you know, the only tools you've got are beyond that, really the Human Rights Tribunal. And that's a process that you don't want to use. I've been down that road with another organization, and it takes something that should be a relatively simple, easy fix, you know, or work together and understanding we can't do it right now, but you know, let's come up with ideas. You know, a collaborative approach as opposed to a adversarial approach. Lee.
Just quickly point of order, do we have another motion on it?
We did have another motion on the floor. Yes, about the Accessible Parking Awareness Month communications. Did you capture the motion, Anna?
Never voted on.
Really parking awareness, anything on social media. I have Terry as having.
Okay, seconded.
Okay, no, I was just gonna say, do we need to say social media specifically to?
Or just leave it open.
Promote it, we'll probably just say.
Yeah, so, yeah, because as we've discussed before, social media is yes.
And yeah, you guys on staff have the best knowledge of what resources and that you have available for that sort of thing. Okay. So seconded by Charlene. All in favor? Any opposed? Then opposed? Okay, carried unanimously. Yeah.
Or they say from the municipalities on saying, hey guys, just words. I don't mean enforcement, I just mean a gentle reminder to our community, pay attention to this.
Yeah.
Because we want to do this.
Yeah, we want accessibility to be a positive thing, not a. Yeah. Okay, and then anything else on the accessible parking awareness? Just one comment. I put a couple notes in my briefing note too about resources for municipal staff on the updated parking requirements, because I know that in Central Saanich we had an issue. This is going back a few years now, where someone from a public body that was addressing an accessible parking issue that I'd brought up went to the municipality and got wrong information. They were saying that it's a public, because it's not a public thoroughfare, this regulation doesn't apply, but it was actually in the zoning bylaw, so it did apply. So just it can even just be a one-page thing with the updated standards and signs, and that can be used for developers and anyone that's looking for information on it. Keep it simple. Okay, and then any other questions or comments before I move on to the feedback? Nope. Okay. So Sidney, public feedback. There is a number of items here that have been with staff responses. And I'd like to say I really appreciate these coming through the committee the way that they do. We get to see issues that are being brought up by the community. We get to learn about the municipal processes and capabilities in that. But we also get to see perspectives. And that snow one was a good example. There, like, for example, there was a comment there about the snow melts fairly quickly, and for someone that doesn't need a specific type of parking space, for example, that's true. Within a week the snow's all gone off the streets pretty much, sidewalks are clear, but when it's piled up, that snow's there for weeks. So when it's piled in an accessible parking space, a business or a shopping center, what have you, may not be accessible for someone like Charlene or my family for weeks. I provided Terry some information from an example in Central Saanich with pictures that show a snow pile melting over about a month. And then what you're left with as well is all that sand and grit that creates a slippery surface, which is a further hazard and a liability for the business and property owner as well. So it's good. I think it's good so that we can then sort of circle back and provide that disability lens, and just to help people learn, because we're all learning through this process. No one, I wouldn't say anyone's wrong, just it's a learning process. So is there anyone that wants to speak on any of these issues that were identified by the community? Charlene?
I just want to say that I really like Sidney's feedback form on this, and I'd like to see Central Saanich and North Saanich having something, because it also gives us a way of seeing that these are the things that are coming up from community members. For me, when I saw these, I thought, oh, thank God, it's not just me, right? Like, it's because I know people are used to seeing mining these things, but it's more of it. There's more of it out there, and I think it's people to have that track. So I really appreciate it.
Yes, for the state chair, that I can report that as of this morning, so Central Saanich launched a new website last night. And as of this morning, both North Saanich and Central Saanich have similar feedback forms to Sidney, and will be bringing the same report forward as Sidney has done. We will follow their model. SPAAC has enjoyed that, and look forward to seeing that at the next meeting.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
As a counselor, I like seeing them, to see what are the issues, and then and then it gives us the opportunity to ask staff questions like, well, how do we get, like, what do we need to do to, is a bylaw change required, or policy change, or education campaign? So I think it's good information to add to SPAAC's kind of.
And I think another really important point with this too is as Kaylee identified, we're a microcosm of a broader community. We've got a set of perspectives around this table, but there's literally thousands of other perspectives out there in the community. And I think that, to do our jobs properly here, we need to be able to hear those perspectives as well. So I really appreciate it, and appreciate the work that all you guys have put into this so far. Any other questions or comments on this? I would like to talk to Anna and Sandy after, just about like my briefing notes and stuff and process and that, if I could, just briefly make sure I'm not causing any ripples. But that's the end of the agenda. So did you have something as well, Sandy, to add? Nope. Okay. in that case, can I get a motion to adjourn? Mr. York, seconded. Jennifer Vaness, all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, meeting adjourned at 12:17. Thank you very much, everyone.